All right, we're recording. Hey, y'all. So today we have Jessica Ford with us. Jessica Ford, PhD, is an assistant professor in the kinesiology department at McDaniel College in Westminster, Maryland, where she teaches courses broadly associated with the psychological aspects of sport, exercise, and performance. In 2020, she earned a PhD in kinesiology with a specialization in sport and performance psychology and a cognate in counseling from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Her current research explores novel applications of sports psychology to populations outside of sport, focusing predominantly on psychological performance enhancement in the music domain. She consults with athletes and musicians in the community on aspects of mental skills training for enhanced performance. A musician herself, Dr. Ford enjoys singing and playing the guitar in her free time. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Ford now.
That was kind of sorry, that I didn't realize how much of a mouthful, like all of my degrees sounded all at once. I don't think I've ever heard them read like in order like that. So it's a lot. It's not as complicated as it sounds, I promise. Let me get my slides going here. All right. Oh yeah, I can move all the faces over in Zoom. This is cool. All right, so I was asked to talk about performance anxiety a little bit today, as that's a facet of mental skills that impacts all of us to some degree or another, and no one is really immune to this experience, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more broadly here. Let me move all of our faces over so I can read the content here. So I just want to talk a little bit. I'm going to be faster at some parts and slower in some parts because I know we only have about 45 minutes, and I could talk about this for years. So, and again, stop me at any point if I'm going too far in one direction, because again, I am a little bit in both worlds. I have the academic side of things where I'm in the research and the lab, and then I'm in the field too. And I understand that sometimes those worlds don't talk to each other. I understand that sometimes what we're doing in the lab is like this ideal situation and perfect conditions and all these like big clinical words that no one really cares about when you're actually teaching students. And so sometimes the wires get crossed. So please stop me at any point if you're like, oh, wait, what do you mean by that? Or that doesn't make sense to me. Or, I will not be offended. Please stop, just yell. I really don't, we're used to this by now, this Zoom life that we have going on here. But I just wanted to briefly touch on my education and training background before talking about performance anxiety, because I think it's relevant given I have a non-clinical background. So I'm not a clinical psychologist by training. Even though I went to school for 11 years straight, you would think that I could be called a psychologist by now, but I don't have the licensure for that. I am in sports psychology and performance psychology more broadly. And I just want to touch a little bit about my music journey and then dive right into music performance anxiety and then some strategies for treating. And I put a star at treating music performance anxiety because I operate under the assumption and the framework that we're never really cured of it. We exist in it constantly. It's going to always be there. It's just a matter of how we cope with it and use it to our advantage. So biologically, we're going to be nervous. Biologically, we're going to feel something in our bodies and in our minds and in our behaviors, even the best of us, regardless of experience, training, age, anything. So when I get it feels icky to me to say treat, because to me, it's never going to go away. We're just going to figure out ways to, and this is what I say to my young musicians. This is a little cheesy, but I think it makes sense. We're going to have butterflies on our stomach. Let's get the butterflies to fly in the formation that we want them to fly in, right? So we're gonna have these butterflies. Let's get them to fly the way we want. So that's why I have a star by treat. So you might hear me say treat, but I mean just cope and adjust. And then I've answered your specific question. So hopefully everyone that answered questions is here today. Otherwise, we're going to be a little lost when I go into like, oh, this is the question that was submitted. But I think it will help everybody regardless, maybe. So, and then any other additional questions that you have. Going backwards. So as Sarah said with my bio that I turned in that I didn't realize when you read out loud was all of those words. I am an assistant professor of kinesiology. So I am more on the sports side of things in my day-to-day. I work primarily with athletes and I teach a lot of athletes in the kinesiology, which is like the exercise science, sports science department. I think 83% of my students identify as a college athlete. So I am in the sport world for my 9 to 5. But a lot of my performance consulting training, working with a mental skills side of things, and a lot of my research, which I'll talk a little bit about, it's how I met Dr. Faye Shaw. She helped me out with my dissertation at UWM, is focused on the music side of things, because I was in both worlds my whole life. I was a college athlete, but I took 10 years of private vocal instruction. I was sang in bands, all kind of a cappella in college, more not, I'm not clinically trained by any means, but music has been such a part of my life. And I realized there's a lot of crossover between the ways in which we get athletes ready to perform and the ways in which we get musicians ready to perform. But there's also a lot of differences. And what I was noticing is that a lot of sport trained people that have no music experience were trying to work with musicians and saying the things that we say to our athletes and not getting to know the population of musicians that we're working with. And I was like, well, that's a problem. You're not going to go to someone and say, you're doing your job wrong when you've never worked in that job, right? Like, who are you? What are you going to tell me? Like, you don't know what it's like to be in this world. So I wanted to make sure that my research was tapping into a little bit of the music domain really broadly, and all different types of musicians and your experiences and mental performance enhancement, all those things. And before I could say with confidence, this works, this doesn't work, because otherwise no one's going to listen. No one's going to care what you have to say if you haven't taken the time to know that population. So that's why I felt the need to kind of talk about a little bit about my education, not because of like some ego thing or like relevant to that. So as I mentioned, I'm not clinically trained, but I love music. I love performing. This was one of the things that I missed the most at the start of quarantine, was being able to get on stage. I was slated to perform at Summerfest. Like, I just missed Summerfest so much, and performing at Summerfest, and that just the vibe and the energy and just live music. And I'm not classically trained, but I mean, I play guitar a little bit, but like fake guitar. Like, I'm not like I wouldn't identify as like a guitarist. But music has always been such a huge part of my life. This is a picture in the corner, left corner, I think, on your screen. I was singing in a bar at age 7, so that's where every 7-year-old needs to be, is in a bar. I just have always loved that scene and being around that. So even though I have this athletics life that is such a part of my identity, I've always had this music part too. And so when I speak about things, I'm coming from that lens of things. I'm not necessarily coming from maybe some of the clinical background that a lot of you have, or the classical background, I should say, not clinical, the classically trained background that some of you may have. I am not coming from that lens. So just understand that that's my bias with the classical training, is that I am not perhaps as versed in some of the theory and things related to that, because that was not my journey. So take that with a grain of salt when I'm kind of going over some of these things. And even if you want to correct me and say, you know what, that isn't my experience, you're wrong about that, that isn't what we feel, please, this is a great experience for everybody to learn from each other, myself included. I'm always open to that discussion as well. And sorry, I think I said clinical before. I meant to say classically trained. I'm getting so much into the academic world, words just fall out sometimes. Okay, so a quick broad overview. I'm sure this is not new to any of us here. There's just a lack of a clear definition about music performance psychology in particular, what it is, what it consists of, what are some of the experiences that we have surrounding it. And from a treatment perspective, hard to define means hard to treat. And so if we don't have a clear definition to operate from, we don't know how to fix it, because we don't know what the foundation of the house is to build it. And we might have heard like stage fright, performance anxiety, music performance anxiety, maybe used interchangeably, but those actually have nuances within their own conceptualization. So stage fright is actually a little bit different than the ways in which we think about music performance anxiety. And sometimes those words get crossed over and they don't always mean the same thing. And even when we think about from more of a clinical side of things, performance anxiety as a diagnosis, as a psychological diagnosis, is differential to maybe more of the social phobia side of things, which maybe tells some of the story, but oftentimes doesn't tell the whole story. So we have a limitation in the ways in which we think about this from a treatment, clinical, academic side of things, because there's so many different definitions floating around about it. One of the definitions that I like to use and that I encourage students that are studying this to operate from is this work, Kenny's work, with music performance anxiety being the experience of marked and persistent anxious apprehension related to music performance that has arisen through biological and psychological vulnerabilities and or specific anxiety conditioning experiences. So that's a lot of words to say. Biology matters in this, our experiences matter in this, and our psychology matters in this. So it's our thoughts, our behaviors, and our environment. All of those things play a role. It's not just one thing. It's a mix of everything that kind of plays a role. It's very multifaceted in that way, which again makes it sometimes hard to treat. Like I said before, all ages, years of experience, type of training. You could be the most accomplished musician of all time. We all experience at some point or another this music performance anxiety experience. And the studies that we operate from that demonstrate the effectiveness of treatment are oftentimes very flawed. There's problems with the ways we design it. There's problems with the ways that we measure MPA, music performance anxiety. I might say MPA to stop saying so many words. Interventions themselves. And so I was just curious, because you are all music educators or studying to be music educators. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that the effectiveness of treatment interventions are so flawed? Like, what are some concerns that maybe you'd see in the way that we measure this stuff? And I'm not going to cold call people because my students hate when I do that. So I'm going to let you guys jump in with any ideas you have.
I think that the reasons for people to experience the music performance anxiety are so varied that if you apply the same solution to different problems, that it doesn't really work for everyone.
Yes, that is definitely a huge piece of that. Other ideas, maybe like one or two other ideas. Let's go for in the interest of time.
I think like what you said earlier, like it's a bit more of like an abstract kind of like concept. Like you can't really pin it and say like this is what it is and this is how we can like fix it. It's like a lot more complicated than that, than maybe as opposed to like other conditions that can be, quote unquote treated, I guess.
Yeah, so it's a very highly subjective experience for most musicians. They experience it in a way that perhaps is unique to that person. Perhaps is, I've never seen anything of my experience represented anywhere, and this is how I experience it. And to Catherine's point too, like like we can't do the same solution to a varied problem. It's like we can't paint a broad brush on. And I'm sure when you're doing your practicum with students, you're acknowledging that too. Like building rapport with individual students is so important. You need to know, I can say this type of feedback to this student, but I can't say this feedback to this student because they're going to interpret it in two different ways. And so we have to modify our language and our content and our approach to each student relative to what they require. Same thing with MPA type interventions. It's just, and Anna too, to your point, like the abstract concept. And if I had the answer to this, if I had a magic pill that would get rid of this, I would be a gazillionaire, and we would all not be here today, right? So it's, even if I spend all day doing the, researching this, studying this, working with athletes and musicians to address performance anxiety, still shows up. So it's definitely like chasing all these different pockets of research there. Good. So that's their only research methods question for this, I promise, because I know research methods is everyone's favorite class.
Is that also like part of like why it's hard to evaluate the effectiveness of a treatment? Go back to like the fact that they struggle to define what music performance anxiety is, and so trying to evaluate like the effectiveness of the treatment might be difficult to also define.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Think about it. If your variable is unclear, how are you going to know if it got better or worse? You don't know what you're even studying. If you're just for lack of a better analogy, like if you're X, if you don't know what X is, we don't know if X got better, worse, or the same. It's unfamiliar. So there are some surveys that are validated that have been shown to be very valid and reliable, but I caution people to use just surveys. I always say, you got to have a qualitative piece in there. You got to have interviews in there. You got to ask them what they mean when they say these things, because they'll fill out, okay, I feel like I'm a 3. Cool. What does 3 mean? 3 out of what? Like I feel a 3. I'm a 3 level of stress. Okay. What does that mean to you? Maybe your 3, Sarah's 3 is different from David's 3. maybe, and then how, as an educator, am I going to tailor an intervention to you if your 3 and your 3 are way different 3s? So surveys can be great for a quick, like, bird's eye view of what's going on, but you really got to do your due diligence and really follow up with I'm just talking from an education perspective of students about what that means to them and what those experiences are. And then you can tailor maybe some suggestions relative to their own experience. And not a lot of people are willing to do that. It's a lot easier to say, this works, goodbye, have fun. It's a lot harder to, I have 27, actually you guys probably have way more students because you're in all different classes. I have X amount of students, and I barely need to get to know their names in a semester, let alone, all their, anxieties and fears and things like that. So definitely an arduous task, but something that you are absolutely capable of accomplishing. I know based on your training at UWM that you're in a good spot. I'm sure this is review and it's like, yes, I know this is how we experience it, but just again, so that we're operating from the same book here. Physiological responses to MPA, we have the things that happen in our body: breathing, increased heart rate, salivation, maybe your muscles feel tense, maybe there's also hormonal responses, maybe cortisol being released. There's also behavioral responses, maybe your posture changes, maybe you have a technique failure, maybe you're pacing around. Those are those things that are like in our actions. And then also our cognitive expression of this. And this one's perhaps the trickiest, because we get stuck in these, rumination cycles of worrying thoughts and loss of concentration, maybe like forgetting something, forgetting the words, or, things related to that. Worry, all of those things. So there's that physiological expression of it, the behavioral and the cognitive. And I'm going to decipher each 3 because the types of interventions that we try are going to aim at targeting each of these things separately. And again, this is a lot of text on the slide here, but just to kind of summarize so that we're operating again from that same place. This model of anxiety is often used as a theoretical framework for music performance anxiety. So again, understanding where we're coming from when we are studying this concept that is, again, so multidimensional, so abstract, so subjective. But this idea that there's musicians that have a biological vulnerability. So they're maybe born with a predisposition to feeling anxious. And that is something that is perhaps the hardest to treat, because it's something that's out of your own control. Like, you cannot help the genetics that you are blessed with, and you might have a generalized biological vulnerability associated with anxiety. But then there's also these generalized and then more specific psychological vulnerabilities that are shaped by our environment. Maybe something happened in your early experiences performing that gave you that, maybe it was an adverse event where you felt like you were out of control, like a loss of control. Like, I was on stage and I blacked out and I forgot everything I was supposed to do. And I was really, embarrassed as a result. And because of that experience, now I'm feeling this type of way, and it becomes more generalized to other events. And then there's more specific vulnerabilities where it's gradually shaped throughout time and is more music specific. Maybe you were in a home environment where you had really high expectations. Maybe you had early exposure to evaluations, which is common. It's part of the game. It's part of our music performance, having that evaluative piece. We can't necessarily eliminate that. So we got to learn how to work through that. And maybe an emphasis on, perfection over excellence. Again, what I put in red are just my own kind of examples relative to that. It's a lot more complex than just that. But understanding that our learning has a genetic component, but also an environmental component. So, like, you might have heard nature, nurture, that fits in with this whole piece here too. It's, the nature of it and then the nurture of it that often is associated with this piece. What we tend to target more often is the social elements of music performance anxiety. Maybe we have a fear of failure. Maybe we have a self-defeating thought pattern. Maybe we have fears of being evaluated negatively, or have a fear of judgment, and maybe afraid of what other people might think. That we typically see this more often of the social pieces of it rather than the other pieces that I described before. But all right, so we know what it is now. What do we do about it? So I'm going to just give a couple of things in the interest of time, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail when I address your specific questions. So I actually made each question its own slide later on. So hopefully, if you see something and you're like, oh wait, I missed what you said, hopefully I circle back to it when I do the questions towards the end here, because I think, what are we at? 122. Okay, so 20 minutes. Got it. Like I said, I could talk about this forever, so I have to make sure I stay on pace here. All right, let me scooch on over here. So remember I said physiological, like in the body, and then we were talking about behavioral and also cognitive ways to kind of approach this. And again, treatment with a star, because we're existing with it. We're not necessarily fixing it. But some physiological things that when you're feeling, anxious or feeling, anxiety in your body more so, a recommended intervention, or one of many, is this idea of progressive muscle relaxation, which I imagine you've heard before, but if not, your muscles in theory can't be tense and relaxed at the same time. So that's the underpinning premise of this. And with PMR, progressive muscle relaxation, you can go systematically from your toes to the top of your head and systematically tense every muscle and then release it. And the whole process could take between 10 and 30 minutes, depending on the process. And that is one way to acknowledge maybe where you're holding the stress in your body. And also, and I'll talk about this with the response that we often have, like the shaking, our hand shake, our leg shake, might actually help to shut off the fight or flight response that we have, because you're doing an automatic, or you're doing an intentional action to counteract that. And I'll explain what I mean by that when we get to your questions. Also, this is not new and novel, but I'm sure you've been told this 1,000 times, but I just feel the need that if I don't mention it, I just would feel silly. Your breathing techniques. And musicians are way better at this than athletes, that's for sure. You already know how to breathe through the diaphragm. You already know, your posture and how important that is. You have all that stuff down. So that piece of it, you are already so great at, and just making sure that when things get seemingly out of control, that is one of the things that is fully within your own control, is your breath. And ratio breathing is another good one, making sure that your inhale is maybe half as much as your exhale. So like 3 seconds of breathing in, 6 seconds of breathing out, but you can do any ratio that's comfortable for you. I've seen 4-8 a lot. I've seen 3-6, and just whatever works for you, just stick with it. But that's just, these are more of the just general ones that I'm sure aren't as new to you. Some of the more sports psyche stuff, that the mental skill side of things, finding a zone of optimal functioning that is best for you. Some musicians like to be amped up before a performance. They want to be energized. They want to talk to everybody ahead of time. Well, I guess talking isn't really recommended, but they want to be on their phone. They want to be engaged in the process. And some musicians are like, leave me alone. I don't want to deal with anything. I don't want to talk to anyone, see anyone. I want to be in my own space, in my own corner. And whatever works for you, advocate for an environment that works for you and seek out opportunities that match that. So if you need to be alone, tell everyone around, hey, don't talk to me. I need to be in the corner with my headphones in, and I need to figure out how I'm going to prep for this way. Please do not talk to me, and understand that those musicians need that time. Like I know with some athletes before competitions in particular, like I worked with one athlete that liked to color before a competition. She would sit in the locker room before it was her time to go, and she would color. She's like, I don't want to think about what's going to happen. I just want to be completely dissociated from it. And having that distraction allowed her to feel less physiologically activated when it was time for her to actually perform, because she wasn't ruminating about it, wasn't feeling it in her body as much. That's just one example. I understand that in some types of performances, that's not possible. And so that's why I just wanted to briefly touch on that. This reframing piece, I'm gonna circle back to, because we had a specific question about that. But the crux of reframing arousal or engagement or nervousness as excitement is interesting, because your body actually feels, if you're nervous or if you're excited, physiologically is the same thing in the body. You have the same exact chemical response. It's just how you appraise it in your mind. So but that's more of a cognitive thing. So I'm going to actually circle back to that as we get to your questions. Centering, finding your center as another intervention with physio. If you want to know more nuances of these, I can absolutely explain them in more detail, but I just wanted to in the interest of time, just touch on a few things, given that I'm sure you're exposed to some of these already. And then intentionally clenching your fists, intentionally shaking your legs to disengage that automatic fight, flight, freeze response, that sympathetic nervous system response that we sometimes have before a performance. And this takes back control of some of the trembling. The trembling is automatic. It's an automatic response. Our body thinks that there's a tiger that's about to eat us. Our body doesn't know the difference between whether or not we're being eaten by a tiger or if we're going on stage. And it's going to be an automatic response that we cannot necessarily dissipate without taking control intentionally of that process. So shaking out your legs on purpose before you, I mean, I understand like in some circumstances, you don't want to draw too much attention to yourself. I get that. But if you have a space to yourself for a little bit, just giving your body a full shake, clenching your hands, clenching your legs, taking that deep breath, and making intentional actions to override the automaticity that you might feel and experience there. Behavioral interventions, targeting more of the actions that you can do. Preparation is unfortunately probably the most cited ways in which we can address this. Being prepared or even over prepared for any situation that you might occur, knowing everything forwards and backwards, so there's no question in your mind that you are going to deliver on whatever you have prepared. And this phrase that we say a lot in sport, so I'm curious if you've heard this before, but this idea of controlling the controllables. What aspects of my performance are within my control? You can control how often you practice. You can control just your attitude. There's a lot of things within your own control that you can account for your performance. But then there's things that sometimes we worry about that lead to music performance anxiety in particular that are entirely out of our control. We can't control if the music is not what we intended. We can't control what the audience thinks. We can't control all these other responses to other people. We can't control the lights. We can't control, well, maybe we can in some circumstances, but things go wrong that are oftentimes out of our control that we focus a lot of our energy on that relate to our experiences of being anxious before a performance. So we can just turn inward and say, okay, I know I prepared well. I prepared for every scenario, that you can hang your hat and say, you know what, I did the best I could with everything that I had. Also being able to, if possible, I'm sure this is difficult now with COVID and all the protocols, but being able to replicate performance conditions to the T. So you talk about dress rehearsal, but that same process throughout your entire preparation experience. So where you're going to wear, visualize if you haven't had a replicated performance experience, you can visualize what the audience response is going to be. Where is everyone going to sit? Where am I going to look? You can essentially experience what you're going to do before you actually do it. And that might eliminate some of those behavioral responses to MPA because you've already done it once before, if not just in your mind. Like, wow, I have some control back. I know what I'm doing because I've been here before, if not just visually. And sometimes that piece of it is helpful, especially with young kids, if they can get an experience of doing it before they actually have to do it. So obviously we have the dress rehearsal piece, but even earlier than that, maybe incorporating more of a dress rehearsal type experience, not just the day before type thing, and getting those performance conditions replicated so that when it's time to go, it's like, oh, I've already been there. I've already done that before. Cool. Because that worry and that rumination sometimes comes in when you feel like you have a loss of control. Also, this idea of power posing, which is a quick 2-minute intervention where you can expand your body, and there is actual physiological and behavioral evidence connecting power posing to the types of hormones that are released and eliminating cortisol. If you expand your body, or if you power posing, like standing, like almost like Wonder Woman. I have like these little pictures here in the corner of having an expansive posture. Not only correlates to you looking the part and looking confident and looking like you know what you're doing, but it actually physiologically decreases some of those hormonal responses that are associated with music performance anxiety. And again, I mean, when I interviewed for my job at McDaniel, I was in the bathroom, just 2 minutes, power pose, deep breath, making myself as large as possible so that I could deliver in the interview. It's the same thing where it might be just a quick couple of minutes before you get on stage, and to as a behavioral intervention that is non-invasive. And then my favorite thing to do, especially with young musicians, is to create this I call them contingency plans. That probably sounds a little bit not what they're supposed to, what it actually is, but these what if scenarios. So like, what if you get on stage and like I was working with a drummer that was, he was like 10 years old. I'm like, well, what happens if your stick breaks? Now what are you gonna do? What happens if you get there and everything's not set up? What are you gonna do? And creating these what if scenarios, so that way if they are presented with a scenario that maybe is out of their control and maybe is stressful, they've thought about how they're going to problem solve to fix that problem and have control for those circumstances. So that is something that is a quick tiny tweak that you can incorporate into your planning when working with young educators, as well as a way to ameliorate some of that stress that comes with uncertainty. Also, performance routines. I'm sure that is also something that you already inherently do. Routines shut off any excess thought. Routines turn off your brain and make things a little bit more automatic for you. When you're turning off your brain, you're less likely to feel those cognitive ruminations that lead to that music performance anxiety response. But if you do use a routine, be consistent, like do the same thing every single time. Like you're gonna drink water at that exact moment. You're gonna say this exact thing. You're gonna sit down that exact way. And the more consistent you are with your routines, the better. And then also something that maybe we don't talk about a lot when we're in classically trained environments and really evaluative and stressful environments that a lot of us are in, is give yourself opportunities to just have fun with it. Just play. Understand, I think we sometimes forget why, and I realize this is a little like, let's all hold hands and smile type of thing, but we forget why we got into music in the first place. We forget about what about music we loved. And when we get into the nitty gritty of juries and, final, rehearsals and all these other things that are very, very stressful, we forget that like we got into this field because we wanted to have fun, evoke, whatever your reason is. It might not even be fun. It might just be a reason unique to you. Seek out opportunities that allow you to do that if you can, and kind of get back to that reason why. And then also giving yourself opportunities to fail and allowing yourself to fail. You're going to be judged no matter what. Someone's not going to like what you're doing no matter what. There's always somebody it could be the best performance of your life and someone's going to hate it. That's just the reality of the world. And you have little control over what other people think. And I think sometimes we play with fear because we don't want to make a mistake. We maybe don't take a risk because we don't want to fail. And sometimes playing with the fear of making a mistake impedes your ability to improve. I had a music director that once told me, like, strong and wrong. I don't know if that's like a thing that person made up, or if it's like, if it's, I don't know, a phrase that is said, but she said she would rather us, sing something really incorrectly and loud and strong and wrong than, hide and not sing it wrong. And then when it comes time for that music, when it comes time for performance, we don't know where the errors are. So that same mentality with your approach to anything is just go with it, go with it with that strong and wrong mentality. Don't be afraid to fail. And if you do fail on a larger scale, that could be an excellent learning opportunity to adapt to. Okay, I didn't do what on this really large performance, I didn't do the best that I could. And I really struggle with X, Y, and Z. Like, let's talk about what I could be doing differently for next time and using it as a learning opportunity. I have never learned anything from things that went well. When things go well, I am uncomfortable because I want to be comfortable. I want to grow and learn, and I don't want to be just accepting just where I'm at. And sometimes it takes failing on a large scale to learn those lessons. And so, that's just a piece of that puzzle. And then also this lastly, and then I have your questions coming in for these last 10 minutes here, the cognitive interventions, the things that we're thinking in our brain, our ruminating, our worrying, and things like that. Avoiding phrases that are like, don't mess up. And when you say things like that to yourself, your brain doesn't know the difference between mess up and don't mess up. So you're actually increasing the likelihood of you making an error by putting don't in front of an action that you don't want to do. So I'd much rather, if you're going to use a self-statement or like self-talk or some kind of phrase, to make it inherently positive and motivating and action-oriented to what you're doing. rather than saying don't do something. I see that a lot with musicians, like don't screw up, don't play this wrong thing. It's your brain doesn't know the difference. You're actually increasing the thought of the mess up than you are otherwise. And then there's lots of different ways of distorted thinking that we've all gotten really good at as we've gotten older that we can really challenge. Polarized thinking in black and white, or overgeneralizing, like, oh, I am the worst, I'm the only one that does this wrong, or catastrophizing, like, this is the most important thing in my whole life and I can't believe I did this wrong. We do a lot of mind reading too, a lot of, oh, my instructor thinks that I'm the worst, I can't believe that they think that thing. And we think that we can read other people's minds, or we think that we can fortune tell into the future. Like, oh, when it gets time for me to do that thing, I'm not going to excel in the way that I want to. It's like, well, you're not operating in the present then if you're reading minds or fortune telling. You're in the past or the future. We using like should statements, like I should be better. I should, don't eliminate that from your thinking. These should statements, all they do is create a distorted thinking in that way. And so that's just a few ways that we have pitfalls in our thinking that are associated with music performance anxiety. And I encourage you, if you're struggling with any of these things, to find alternative evidence that counters what you're saying. And so if you're thinking like, wow, everyone is better than me, it's like, really, everyone's better than you? You won a competition last year. You really think everyone's better than you? Everyone's better than you? Just really challenge those thoughts that you have. And sometimes it just is a matter of acknowledging that they even exist. Sometimes we're on autopilot for all of our existence and we don't even know some of the things that we're saying to ourselves, and our body listens, to what we say. And so that's just kind of one way to go about it there. In the interest of time, I'm going to go just directly to your questions here. And some of the things that we talked about. And I'm going to get our faces back up so I can see everybody. Cool. So I have, so one of the questions, I just literally just did them in order of the email and I just answered them that way. And if there's anything else that you want me to expand on, let me know. So someone had wrote, like, why are performance-based music assessments so difficult? And again, I'm not the arbiter of all assessment, and I don't have like a finalized, generalized answer to that. But what I see with performance in particular is that it's taking a subjective premise like art and music and then turning it into something that's objective instead of like wrong or right. And so when you are, even if you have a good mindset, sometimes you feel like things are always going wrong. I think that the person that asked this question said things are always seem like they're going wrong. I would reframe what you think going wrong is to you. And maybe that is a catastrophization from what I talked about before with the cognitive distortion. Maybe it is that are you better than you were yesterday? Are you better than you were a week ago, a year ago, a month ago? Focusing more on that process of improvement rather than the outcome will help you be in a better, just generalized mindset of improvement rather than I'm wholly right or wholly wrong. That's another black and white thinking type thing too. Like, what is right to some, obviously we have some standards of things that are right and wrong, but a lot of times it's subjective. Like who decides what's wrong? Who decides what's right? What does that mean for you? And how can we move toward that direction? Also, I think they're difficult because of our identity. Musicians, how we define ourselves, our self-concept. We are a musician. I guarantee if you were in an icebreaker in a class, you would say, I'm a musician. And that's how you would, one of the first things you would say to define yourself. And that identity gets threatened when we're evaluated poorly. We think about it as part of our character instead of something that we do. Like, we are a musician, but but music is what we do. It's not who we are. We're more than just musicians. And so I think your worth, and this takes a long time to get there. I think some of this comes with age too. And so maybe I'm coming from just being a little bit removed from some of this stuff, but your worth is not measured by other people's opinions of you. Like, it's almost, I don't want to say like a who cares mentality, because you have to care because it's your education. But most people at the end of the day are only worried about themselves. They're projecting it onto you. So that's just one way that you can maybe, if you're in a negative mindset, think about, okay, am I improving a little bit more than I was yesterday? Even like 1 percentage point more. Am I getting better? Am I moving in the right direction? If you can say yes, then everything else is irrelevant. All right, another question we had, how can you channel nervous energy into excitement? I love this one because like I said before, your body experiences it the exact same way. It's just your brain that tells it how to appraise it. So you can train your brain with, I mean, this is not a quick fix. It's going to take time to work on these things, but you can appraise the situation as this is a challenge for me. I can't wait to tackle this challenge. I am so hyped for this performance. They don't even know what hit them. Like be a little, almost like a little, I don't want to say cocky, but you are great at what you do. You haven't gotten to where you are today if you weren't excellent at what you do. And you know that. You worked your butt off to get here. So let's show everybody what you're made of. Flip it with that instead of like, oh man, it's going to be a bad performance because everyone is better than me and I hate that they evaluate, whatever it might know. I've earned this. I've worked for this. Now I'm going to show you what I worked for. And sometimes even just saying it out loud helps trigger that mind-body connection of, all right, I'm excited. I'm not nervous. And if you're worried about, the energy being too much where you're losing focus, sometimes getting it just actually physically out of your body can be helpful. So like maybe jumping up and down, walking around for a little bit, doing that systematic, tensing and releasing that I talked about, get it within your body too. Just depends on what works for you in that circumstance. But sometimes just the idea that it is the same in your body, it's just how your brain thinks about it, is just that light switch on for some musicians to think about the ways that they channel that. All right, so some specific things to 15 minutes before to prepare to not be nervous. The ratio breathing that I talked about, doing just one exhale right before a performance, finding your zone of optimal functioning, and then encouraging and leaning on that zone. Like, do you like to be hyped up before? Do you need to be calmed down? Do you need to be alone? Do you want to be around people? Whatever that is for you, align your behaviors with that and make sure that, I mean, it's a team effort too. Make sure that everyone that's in your circle is aware of that too. And then reconceptualizing your approach to nervousness as, all right, I'm nervous because I care about this. And showing that you're ready for this. If you didn't feel anything in your body, that means that you don't care. It means that this is just apathetic to you and that it's not for any reason. And because you're feeling some type of way, it means that you like it, that you care about it, that you're ready. And then worst case scenario, if you've been practicing your performance routines, fall back on those because those are automatic and those require little to no cognitive thought and you can just do them automatically. So if you're really in a bind and you've been practicing these pre-performance routines that you have, fall back on those in a crutch if you need those things. All right, I have a few more, but I know that I'm conscious of time. So do we want me to just end here or go through the rest of, like, maybe there's 2 more questions.
Yeah, there's only a few more. We can just finish it up.
Okay. This is the one I wanted, I think, to talk about with us today. And the other one is about me, which I don't think is as important. So how can I stop telling myself that everyone is better than me and I'm not good enough? And this is the idea of finding tangible evidence that refutes the claims that you're making in your brain, those cognitive distortions. Like, I know that not everyone is better than me because, and then find evidence to support that. And there is evidence there. I don't want you to look me in the eyes and say there is no evidence, because there is, especially if you're in college studying music. Obviously, you had to get here with some standard of practice that shows that you're competent at this. And so we sometimes fall into these thought cycles where, oh, everyone is better. No, I'm good at what I do. I know that not everyone is better than me because I did this show and I got this leading role or whatever it might be. Finding that evidence on your own within your mind that kind of connects that. And then reframing some of that negative self-talk into a phrase that is more motivational or action-oriented, or maybe anchored in something that is totally within your own control, such as your own effort, your own attitude, such as like, I am prepared. That is one way to do it. Just keeping your eyes on your own plate. Swimmers that look into other lanes don't finish as fast as the competitors that just look at the wall. Good enough is subjective, and most people really only care about themselves anyways at the end of the day. They wouldn't admit that. They probably wouldn't say that to your face, but there's no really net positive gain for people that are critical of other people. There's no net positive gain from being a critic. And any criticism that is unconstructive, that is about your character or who you are, comes oftentimes from a place of personal projection. It's that person projecting their own insecurities onto you. And if it's not, obviously feedback that is constructive is helpful, but criticism that is unconstructive is oftentimes coming from a place that has nothing to do with you at all. So I would just not even entertain a personal thought about that. Do not take that personally. It's about them. It's not about you. And then yeah, I just had my own pre-performance routine and some other things about when your legs and arms are shaking, but I think I kind of already covered that with some of that. So yeah, I got a little fast at the end and get into some of the nitty gritty of it. But I can also send the slides too, if that's something that you're interested in looking at further, since I have more details on there that I didn't touch. Yeah. And all right, I'll just end there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Everyone, please give a round of applause for Dr. Ford. Thank you so much for coming. This was super informative and helpful. And yeah, if you email the slides to me, I can send that out to everybody. So awesome. Thank you. Thanks for coming, everybody. Hope you enjoy and have a great day.
Yes, and send them my email if you have further follow-up questions that can be addressed. I can email them to you.
Absolutely.